small sukkah, and I came there.
The
And I was,
Klausner Rebbe built a small
so,
sukkah.
a sukkah. He and his followers built a sukkah there. And I came in, of course, we were good friends and so forth. After all, he sat me down at the table there, and the Hasidim were jumping around. It was a small place. You didn't have to have many Hasidim to jump there. And he was there, and he was, we were drinking some kind of beer, I think it was. It was that early beer that was being produced in Germany was very bad. In fact, I had to drink it with the commanding officer of Dachau in the evening when I would visit with him. He'd have a case of it, and he would take a bottle, and I would take a bottle. It was a very difficult experience for me, but again, I had the same beer with the Klausner Rebbe. They had one cup. They passed it around, and we all drank from the cup. And then suddenly he said to me with great excitement that they had meat for sukkahs. So this threw me, because I know A, it's illegal, B, it's dangerous, because the army gets onto this is really a bad situation. And C, I wondered, where do you get it, and how do you get it, and who kills it, who's the shofet? So then he goes a step further and he says, not only one cow, he says 2 cows. As it turned out, the reason there were 2 cows, they had made a deal with the German, you see. The Germans weren't allowed to sell it, but the price they paid was so astronomical in terms of the economy. So he bought 2, taking the forequarters of both and giving the hindquarters back to the German, you see, so really got 1 cow. So I got terribly angry because we were in the early days then, and I felt having any traffic with the Germans, even buying a cow from a German, was something that I couldn't really put up with. In fact, I had to run across a situation where in one camp they had set up a brothel and were using German girls, and this too threw me.
Where was that?
This was up in the castle area, and I felt that this was something that was difficult to take at that time. Well, anyway, we're talking about
The meat.
the meat, black market, right? So meat was available. There was no question. Coming back to Barat Salah. In other words, meat was available. Here you had shchita and you had the cows and so forth. And later on, I found that meat was generally available. It was bought from the Germans. And there were interesting aspects to it. How do you get a cow? How do you bring it into a camp and so forth? Very interesting. It all worked out.
How did they do it?
The ambulance. You take the GI ambulance. That is, every camp had its way
But
to.
how did they have access to the ambulance? Or you did it?
Oh, no, I didn't, because by this time the camp was organized, and you had a transportation department in the camp.
Oh.
And you paid off the guy that, the ambulance driver. He said, meet me up here, 3 miles down the road, or so forth, and they'd put that. And then, of course, you bring the cow in, then you have to shoch it. And everything had its structure, and in fact, one of the big court cases we had, in which I was the arbitrator, had to do with the price of meat in one of the camps. And what the people were complaining was that the price of meat was high. And the people who bought the cows and prepared them and sold them broke down the figures for me and said, this is what we have to pay. And they wanted me to rule on a controlled price on meat. And I refused.
Wage and price control?
That's right, they want to control it. My point was that I'd be prepared to back a controlled price, providing it pertained to all goods and services. But I pointed out why only on the meats? After all, there were other things that were brought in, the fresh fruits and vegetables, which you weren't entitled to, sugar and spices and so forth. So I wouldn't rule on it. But I remember then, after the court case was over, I looked at this fella, big fella, and I said to him, tell me, I don't understand. You know what happens if you get caught? They were hard on people who... So he says to me, and he points to a couple of his sons, strapping fellows, he says, 12 Koteletten ab Tag müssen Sie essen. A cutlet is a hamburger.
Yeah.
12 hamburgers. So, I mean, this was it, and this was their motivation and so forth. Well, anyway, getting back to Barat Salah. The kosher business was not really a problem. The meat was... you could get the meat, and of course... the other things were available. I imagine they could have brought in, like tefillin and other things that could be brought in, and maybe they did, and I'm sure they did.
They never asked you for tefillin or...
No, we delivered whatever we found and had and so forth. Anything of that nature we had provided. We had provided to the camps to begin with. We knew these people were there and they wanted these things. We unearthed the whole cemetery of Munich, and a lot of it had been buried, and we brought it out and gave it to the camps.
So in other words, JWB didn't have to supply that for you?
No, JWB was not in a... All that JWB at that time had little mezuzahs, and those, of course, didn't pose a problem at the beginning, but they had the little prayer books and this... and it's interesting, I remember in the first days, I went to a camp outside of Munich. It was a collecting point for DPs, a tremendous place, and they had a big hall like a hangar, and it was announced that I was coming and I was going to conduct a service, and we had these JWB prayer books, and so we brought cases in, and at this time, after I'd been in Dachau for a while, there was a Jew in Dachau who attached himself to me. He became my kind of an assistant, like a shamus. Wherever I went, he went. He went to the cemetery with me. After a while, he recited the Kaddish rather than my reciting it. And wherever I went, he went. And so he came with me this day, and we brought these cases of JWB prayer books. I don't know where we got them. And I started to distribute them, and he pulled my hand. He says, "No, don't do that." I looked at him. I said, "Why not?" I continued. Got rid of every JWB prayer book, distributed everything. And I got up there to conduct the service. Nobody had a prayer book. There wasn't a prayer book to be seen. You see, this was in the very early days, and everything had its value. You took whatever you could get. And so, whether you wanted to pray or not, who knew what this book was worth? And we didn't have a prayer book for service. Well, anyway, so this was the nature of Arat Sala. And later on, I saw some of their publicity and their maps and their units, installations, and so forth, which is fascinating because it's how people create history. It's, you know, in terms of what they did and so forth. But basically, that's what they did. They took an interest in the Orthodox community and provided for them and so forth.
But they weren't concerned about
No.
Klausner?
No. See, at the beginning, while I was working, everything was kind of a unity. And when others came in, even B'nai B'rith came to me one day, one of the representatives, and asked me to do him a favor. Would I get him the names of DPs who were previously B'nai B'rith members? B'nai B'rith wants to send them package program. That was the last conversation we had. But this was the nature of it, you see. And then, of course, the Shlichim did the same thing. It's they had two portfolios, supposedly a total interest and then a party interest. B'nai B'rith had its interest in its people. Then we had, of course, the Rosenwalds and the other German families who were interested in the Jews from Theresienstadt, and they called upon me to find a good camp for them, bring them down. I went looking for it, found it, and they decided not to come down. But I got calls from the family, helping them, you know, take care of it. The Warburgs, so forth, Eddie Warburg, the others, they had this interest too.
Well, I can understand that a particular family might be interested in particular Jews.
Yes.
But the specific organizations are only concerned about their own memory.
Well, these are the incidents as they occurred.
Just one further question along this line. I noticed throughout our discussion that you had to provide this and you had to provide that. Don't you think that the Jewish organizations could have done something a little better to help you in this matter?
No, everything proceeds in terms of a vacuum. That's what we had, a vacuum. Depends who moves in to fill the vacuum. Let's say if there came a time when I walked into to 3 Zebrastrasse, which was the building that I got, into the room which was my office one time, and sitting at the desk is a JDC man now. Mm-hmm. And I forget his name, but he was an old-timer with the movement and with JDC, and he's sitting there, and we're now in 47, late 47 or 48. And he says to me, Klausner, what do you want? It was a good question. What do I want? Actually, I was still operating out of an original force that put me in time and place. Here is a big organization now. Here's a man sitting at a desk. He has in back of him millions of dollars. Programs, whether good or bad, is indifferent. Whether they were on time or not on time, that's not important. The fact is that now they're there. And it would be silly for me at this point to start running around to get a can of gasoline or trying to provide. And I mean, there's no need for it. At this point, it was just simply a question of programming. What should be done? And here again, I differed with him. You see, by the time the organizations came in and sat down to provide for these people, I had already taken the position not to give them anything, you see, because I felt that a lot of them were making themselves too comfortable. And the aliyah was slow. At one point, I could tell you that when they were girding for the war in '48, I was asked to collect 1,000 individuals who would go. And I couldn't. So what I did is went to the prisons, wherever there were prisons, and there were Jews in prisons. And I went in and I tried to make deals. And the people in charge of the prison were willing. They were happy if I would get the people out of Germany. They weren't interested in keeping there. And I could not muster a corporal's guard.
Even from people who were in prison?
Even people who are in prison.
They would rather stay in prison?
Well, they wasn't rather stay. They figured they'll get out sooner or later, one way or the other. After all, the people had developed a certain shrewdness and so forth. But at this point, I felt that some pressures should be established so that the people wouldn't remain. Now, of course, I was emotionally committed to certain situations. Somebody could sit down here and kind of take me apart on this and say, by what right? After all, these are people. They have their choices. Who said they had to go to Israel? Why can't they make themselves comfortable in Germany if they want? Well, I have friends who remained in Germany. They're very wealthy there now. In fact, I have one man who worked with me at the Central Committee, and he used to be the guard at the door. In fact, he used to wrap herring in newspaper every time that herring was being sold outside. And he was the kind of a guy that I used to call in for money matters, because he knew everybody, and I would say to him, listen, we need 100,000 marks, or we need 50,000, get it. And he would go and he'd make the deals. And I had a very good reputation. People would make a deal with me, and they were sure that the deal would be kept, whether the money would be paid in the United States, whether it be done here. After all, I couldn't pay out the money. But we had certain guarantees. And there he was. I saw him some years ago, not too many years ago. He's now, I think, one of the leading fur merchants of the world. And what he said to me was rather strange. He said to me, had you not kept me at the door of the Central Committee, I'd have been a richer man today. And I looked at him and said, but aren't you rich? He said, yes, I have a home here, I have a home here, I have a home here, and my wife, I think he married a German woman, and so forth, I have this, that, and so forth. He says, but think how much richer I would have been if I didn't, spend my time, well, this is what he chose to do. Whether I had the right to do what I did in terms of establishing a concept or a philosophy is something that can be questioned, except that all I can do is tell you that this was the case. And that's how the years unraveled.
Well, what about the Jewish organizations before they came in? Do you feel they should have done something? They should have been able to send material through JWV?
They couldn't do that. They couldn't. First of all, the situation was so tremendous that JWB wasn't the kind of an organization to do it. If you asking me to reconstruct history in terms of other, I'm not in a position to do that, and I don't think it's fair to history. All you can do is say this is what happened. Then, if you want to evaluate or draw certain conclusions, that's your business.
I understand, but I'm asking an individual who was there during that period of time. Did you feel that JDC and other organizations should have done more, or could have done more?
It isn't that I felt they should have. I expected them to do more. Now, when I walked into Dachau, in fact, when I became aware that I was going to Dachau, and then came into Dachau, the first experience was one of tremendous loneliness, in the sense that here I am, and here is the camp, and here are the people, and what have I got? I got a few little mezuzahs in my pocket, JWP, which I was embarrassed about, to even show it to anybody. I was even afraid to walk in and say that I'm a Jew, I'm a chaplain. But in my first encounters, I promised them JDC. They're coming, I said. They're coming. This was my first whole bit. It isn't that I came into a job and I was going to do something. I came into a situation where I only responded, and my story is merely the story of the response of one man to a situation.
I understand, but the Jewish community sent you out there.
Jewish community didn't send me out
well,
there.
The JWB sent you out
No,
there.
JWB had nothing to do with sending me. JWB has nothing, is not my partner in this.
Who's your partner?
The United States Army. I had nothing to do with JWB. I was a chaplain in the United States Army.
Mm-hmm.
What's JWB got to do with it? I had nothing to do with Jewish Welfare Board. I applied for the Army. I was turned down once. And then I went to another state, and I was accepted. The reason I was turned down is because I was fulfilling a pulpit there, and they wanted to keep me there. And then I got out of that, and I got into the Army. And I had a rather ridiculous career in the Army at the beginning until suddenly I woke up to the fact that I'm in Dachau. Even when I went to Dachau, I didn't know I was going to Dachau. I wasn't sent. I was sent to a sent to a 7th Army installation. Who knew where it was? Nobody told me. The same story with the whole coming of the American Army to Germany. Who knew what was going to happen there? And so I now am in Dachau. It had nothing to do with JWB. This was an assignment that came.
Did you feel that you wanted to let the American Jewish public know what was going on?
Yes, I tried, but it was difficult. I had no way of communicating, except that letter, statement that I sent to Silver and to Wise and one other person, which Browdy got. It must have gotten there or someplace somehow, or stopped someplace, because Browdy knew about it,
Mm-hmm.
and he made a big issue out of it.
Did you feel need to write the papers, etc.?
No. And then when Harrison came, that was interesting. Now, when Harrison came, you recall that Harrison was appointed by, the story is that he was appointed by President Truman to see, because there was some talk about the situation. As it
Now,
turns
you say that you think that you had helped this.
Yes, right. That's my conclusion. In fact, I wrote a letter once to Morgenthau about this, but he never answered me. You see, with Harrison, I tell you the following story. One day I was in Dachau, and Richmond came in, Colonel Richmond. And he tells me that a man is coming by the name of Harrison as a representative of the president to see really what's happening here with the DP situation, which means that, it's known now that there's a situation here. And he takes a piece of paper and he says, here's the itinerary. So I looked at it, and I looked at him, and I said, of course you realize this is ridiculous. He says, yeah, I know it. I'm in charge. Been put in charge by the Army. This is the itinerary I have to draw up. And the reason I'm here is to tell you that this is the itinerary. Now, if you want it changed, you're going to change it. And I says, how? And he says, very simple. Harrison has to come to Dachau. You're going to meet him here. And you're going to tell him about this itinerary. And from then on, you're on your own. That's exactly what happened. He came there. He wouldn't have seen a thing except the plastic aspects of the thing. And then I traveled with him, showed him every hole, every pile. And then he wrote his report.
You say he wasn't the representative of Truman?
No. When I met with him at the hotel, he started out by saying to me, and that's what brings me to the question of my statement. He started out by saying, I want you to understand who I am. I am not a representative of the president. And he pulled out a letter and showed it to me, a letter from President Truman to him, in which he says, I understand you're going to Germany to see the, DP.
Why would he go to the DPs? Okay.
I will be happy or something to hear your report. I figure what happened was that Morgenthau was the man that created the situation. That word got back to Morgenthau. Whether I sent him a report, I don't remember who the third person was. But word got, or somebody came to Morgenthau. And Morgenthau then got this situation set up for Harrison to come, and the president was informed. And the president very nicely said, good, why not?
So you think Morgenthau, excuse me, arranged this?
That's right, that's my guess. And I tried to get the answer from Morgenthau, but again, I never got an answer from him.
You think Morgenthau would have taken that upon himself?
At that time, yes. Later on, Morgenthau became very active. And he's the one that traveled with Friedman. Friedman would have been court-martialed.
You mean Herbert Friedman?
Herbie. Except that, what's his name, saved him. Of course, you can get that story from Herbie. You know, that whole big business at the end because of what he had done, and then the meeting with Morgenthau, and then traveling with Morgenthau, Morgenthau insisting that he travel with him. So and that was the beginning of Herbie's career, even afterwards.
Do you want to stop now?
Well, I don't know. It's let me have a cup of coffee. But one of the things you have to get to, because after all, I'm just only giving you my story. You have to get a picture of how many chaplains are involved here. Sure, you want to tell the story of chaplains. You don't want to tell my story. You're not going to write the biography of Abe Klausner. You've got to get whatever other chaplains touch the situation. You also have to make a distinction someplace between chaplains who came and saw something and responded, and later on the DP picture, where after one of the advisors had established the DP program, and DP chaplains were. And then that you can get an official list. I don't know how many there are.
I have it.
I don't even, for some reason or other, I don't know, if you just read off the names, I'd be interested at the moment.
No, I don't think I brought the list, but you have Louis Barish's book, Rabbi's Uniform?
Well, I haven't seen the book, but anyway, Barry.
Well, in the back of that book, here is the list. There's Breslau, Dembowitz.
Yeah, Dembowitz I know. I met Dembowitz in Germany. These men came later.
No, I don't have that list with me. But here I have a list of certain people I have to contact: Morton Berman, Eugene Cohen, William Dalen, Aaron Dechter, Herman Dicker, Herbert Eskin. There's a Marvin Goldfein, Louis B. Grossman. Two of those men died. Abraham Tzemach, George Vida.
Vida, I know.
Herbert Ribner, Joseph Messing, David Lefkowitz, Siegel, Rabbi Siegel, Jacob Siegel.
Were these all DP chaplains?
DP or were involved in Europe in that period.
Yes.
Eli Bonin.
Bonin, I know. He just came through with the 45th Division. Nice fella. Eli.
Eli. Harry Skidell. Herschel Schachter.
Herschel came just that trip from Auschwitz, that Auschwitz business that he made a big deal out of. Buchenwald, the Buchenwald business.
Yeah.
I know all the people who were involved in that. That was it was a quickie.
Yeah, well, he took 500.
That's right, and that's it. That was it.
Samuel Burstein, Howard Saperstein.
Burstein is the one that I told you about, the one that followed me in Kassel. He wrote a book about his experiences, a chaplain with wings.
Oh, he wrote about it?
Yes.
Okay. Samson Goldstein, Paul Goring, Gorelik, Adler in China, Lorch,
yes. Well, Lorch came through just briefly. In fact, the story about Lorch being there a year was Lorch's story, which was incorrect.
Abramowitz.
And Mike. Yeah, he was a nice guy. He was up in Berlin. He had a little run-in there with, yeah.
He has a lot to say, you told me.
Well, he may have, but Mike came later. He was in the...
He was with Friedman.
Yes, he was up there, and he was in Berlin, and then there was a little run-in there. But we'll give you his picture.
Schenk? Emmanuel Schenk?
I know these people, but in terms, I'm just trying to relate them to the...
Isidore Breslau? Jacob Kraft? Burkowski?
Yeah, well, there are many more than I had anticipated in terms of men.
Esrig, Bert Klein, Morris Kurtzer.
Morris, I know, yes.
Oscar Lifshitz.
I met Lifshitz.
Eichhorn.
Yes.
Sidney Lefkowitz, Earl Stone. Seligman, Yosef Miller, Erwin Hyman. That's about most of the guys that I have.
Yeah, well, most of them are tangential. Through the year... at the beginning, when you came in 45, when the armies were moving across, each army had a chaplain.
Right.
So you were moving across, and here a man It stops here for a day, a man stops here, and down in Vienna you had a couple of the boys, one of them was killed, a very nice fellow. Like Bonin, for example. Bonin came in with the 45th Division, he was in Dachau, and they'd been there for a day or half a day, moved down to Vienna, and then he was there and until he left, and that was it.
Yeah, but he has a story to tell about
Yeah, he has that particular story of what he did when he came into Dachau and what he did and so forth. Each one has his little story. And I'm sure wherever they stopped, there were certain little vignettes that are available and so forth. So you had one group in that layer. Then when the army settled down and men were being discharged, in that period, we had nobody. You see? Nobody. In other words, I traveled from Salzburg to Frankfurt.
Now, what period are we talking? What's the second?
45. May, June, July, August of 45. Traveled from Salzburg to Frankfurt. We had nothing in the north then. We had nothing. No chaplains, attached any place. And the DP concept hadn't been established. You had guys like Lippmann. I don't know his exact date. You had Wall because they happened to be with division. Wall with the 9th Division. And Lippmann. Then they had other chaplains that came through. I met with them. This meeting that must have taken place. I know Bob Katz came in to see me once. Dembowitz gave me some money to get a couple of children.
You didn't remember that.
Huh?
I don't think he remembers that.
I remember very well because he asked me for the money back.
Maybe you can tell me.
Maybe he wouldn't tell you. But he gave me $600. I remember it very well, to get 2 children, part of the program. I explained it to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave this money. I used it. I gave part of it to Genya, to others. And when I came back to the United States and I was in Boston as a rabbi, Dembowitz came to me. And he said, it's a very embarrassing situation, but I gave you $600. You never got the children. I said, did you expect me to guarantee you to get children? After all, he knew I didn't go for the children. Well, he would like to return the money to his family, whoever gave it to him. And I think he asked me for $200 or $300, which I gave him. I was so taken by that situation. Sure, he was a nice fellow. I liked him, good friend, and I had to run into this situation. So I ran into Dembowitz. This fellow Lifshitz, too, I ran into once because I ran into a situation, I think it was a St. Etienne. We had a crisis one day, and I was looking for him because I knew he was in the area. And I found him sleeping, the Shabbos. He was taking the nap.
Is he Orthodox?
Huh? Yes, yeah. And I was so angry. How in the hell can you be sleeping now? We have this crisis and so forth. I think it was a riot up in Landsberg or something. And I just cursed and muttered and left. I think that was Lifshitz. So I met many of these, but the basic period, that is when we're dealing with Dachau, and we're dealing with Flakkesern in Freising, and St. Etienne, and Gauting, and Feldefink, and Fahrenwald, and Landsberg, and the Kaufring camps. In other words, all the turmoil that goes in through here. We had no other chaplain in this picture during that whole first year.
45. No chaplain.
Yeah. Now the other chaplains, the first group that came, then there were others later came in. I know that Messing was down in someplace east of us, and.
But I'm told that Messing did not want to do anything.
Well, that's the point. He was there. I knew that Messing was there. But in the other camps, we had no one. We didn't have any chaplains. Now, what these other fellow lords must have come through with the first wave, and been up north or someplace, and been there for a day or a week or so forth, and then when the unit was pulled out, he could have gone out. Then, of course, what happened after Bonin, I told you the story, but what happened after, let's see, I was there, left in 47, and I left for a short while, and then I came back, and I was there through 48. And then now in the north, when I was there in 47, 48, I was the only chaplain in the north. We had, let's say, let's see, how many major we must have had, 5, 6, 7 major installations up in the north. And we had no other chaplain.
We didn't get to that story yet about how that, you were in the Army from 40, You were in Germany from 45 to 46?
47.
47. And then you said you left the Army and then you went back
That's
in?
right. In 47 I left. I see, by the time 47 rolled around, it seems that I had antagonized lots of people. And strangely enough, the one man that I had antagonized was the one man that should not have been involved in this at all. A strange thing happened. From the time that I left the 116th Evac Hospital, I was lost as far as the Army was concerned, but I was very much in the picture. One day I get a note, and the note is from Browdy, an envelope. The DP comes in to Munich, and he hands me the envelope, and I open it up, and it says, incidentally, you belong, and he names the unit I belong to. And that's all. By this time, I imagine my relationship with Browdy had changed. In other words, he had come to terms with the fact that I was very much involved because he was, at this point, not interested really.
So I got the impression from him that he was helping you.
That's his impression, yes.
That
At this point, yes. I mean, if you take the story at this point, yes.
that he was always covering for you.
Yes, at this point. At the beginning, we had this fight.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole attitude was different. But I think later on he came to see it because we remained good friends. I'm just describing the situation. But at this point, he was covering because here was an envelope. And it simply said, incidentally, you belong to this unit. And this unit was in Regensburg. I think it was Regensburg. And I decided the best thing to do is go up and look at the unit. And after all, I belonged to it. So one day I drive up to Regensburg, and I think it was Regensburg. I'm not sure, but I'll think of it now. And I come in, and there's a chaplain's office, and there's a chaplain sitting at the desk. He recognizes me from someplace. We went to school together at Harvard or something. He says, hello, how are you? I says, I belong to this unit. He says, yeah. He said, it won't do you any good. I said, what do you mean? He says, we're pulling out. And he says, you're a low man on the totem pole. You don't have enough, points, whatever the system was. So I says, oh, that's nice. I said, what do you suggest I do? He says, well, you've been in this unit for a long time, but you've never taken any leaves. You got a lot of leave coming to you. I says, fine, you want to give me some leave? He says, yeah, where would you like to go? I says, how about Switzerland? He says, fine. And they make out leave papers for me for Switzerland. And that was the end of it. I went back to Munich. All right. So I'm back in Munich again. And I'm back working. And then I get word, how I got this word I don't know, that I'm assigned to Berlin. So I decided to go to Berlin, and I was interested in going to Berlin because now we came face to face with the question of the Russians moving in on the Jews. So I came to Berlin.
In 1947.
Yeah, could have been late 46 or beginning of 47. This too can be checked. A fellow named, what's his name, was the director up there, Fishbein. I remember because he was the brother of the Fishbein of the American Medical Association. And I come there, and I check in at the chaplain's office, and there's a Jewish chaplain there. He's in Boston. He was there. You should have his name on the list. I don't know why you don't have his name.
Who's that?
I forget his name. He hates my guts. There are two brothers. One of them is outside of Boston. Yeah, I know him very well. I'll think of the name. But you didn't read off his name. I'm a sugar.
He's still in Boston?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was a chaplain.
That's right. He was right there. And
Conservative,
Orthodox. So I walk in and I meet him, and the first thing he says to me, what a wonderful job you've been doing. Heard all about it. Fine. Everything's fine. Then I begin to wonder what I'm doing there. After all, you got a chaplain here. They don't need me, really. Except that I know what's happening in the Russian zone, and I figure the first thing to do is to get over there. And since I'm very sensitive on this whole subject of Russia, at this time, knowing what was happening, where were we?
Berlin. Berlin.
Yes. And so I decided to go out and see the Jews there, which I did. And they were housed in these buildings. And I had began to talk to them about getting out of there. Now, they were a little bit afraid of getting out of there because they were structured in the city and there weren't any people willing to work with them in terms of getting out, in terms of the institutions that were there. And I began to tell them that if they don't get out there, they're going to get caught in this trap, and not to wait, just get out and leave. And of course, this antagonized the other people that were, they wanted some kind of order there, and in terms of the city structure, and I was not involved in the order of the city. I just figured that if the Russians ever take over, since the lines were going to be marked, and they would have to suffer the same fate that other Jews who went back. Well, anyway, by the time I got back to the office, the chaplain's office, the attitude of the chaplain had changed towards me. And he said to me, I understand that you haven't turned in a chaplain's report in, I don't know, the period, a year or two. And I looked at him strangely, as if to say, what's this your business? I made light of it or said something about the reports, but obviously I couldn't send a report. Who was I going to send it to? And so he started to castigate me as a lousy officer. And I was flabbergasted. And finally, he said a word, I said a word, and then when he kind of calmed down, I said, come, let's have lunch. And he said something about not wanting to eat with a pig or something of that sort. And that was the end of that. Except, as I discovered later, the chief chaplain of the post was in the next room. You know, it was a little alcove, actually. He knew it all the time. And he dragged me into that situation. However, recognizing the situation in Berlin, I had already called the chaplain's office in Frankfurt and told them to reassign me. And they asked me where did I want to go. I said, Munich. And so they reassigned me to the 198th General Hospital in Munich. At the same time, this chief chaplain was also reassigned to Munich. And we both got there at the same time. Well, he was out to get me. In fact, when I arrived back in Munich, the conference, the Central Conference meeting had been set up for the Rathaus. That's where Ben Gurion was coming. And all I was interested in then was to get to the Rathaus, that's all. And so I went into the the executive officer and said, you know, I've checked in and so forth, but I have an important meeting, so forth, and gave him just a general description, and I have to go. He said, fine. Unfortunately, I had done something that would never have occurred to me to do before. I had signed in. Because that same day, Tall Ed, as they called him, the chaplain, had checked on me. And had I not signed in, he would have let me have it. He let me have it anyway because I checked in and so forth. He was out to get me. Well, anyway, a number of other things happened. I was at the hospital, but I never did anything at the hospital. I was rarely there. I didn't eat a single meal in that hospital. I used to drop by on a Friday evening from time to time to see if anybody wanted to have services so that I could at least pretend that I was the chaplain. And eventually I got into a situation where another chaplain in Munich, I don't remember his name, had been involved with a unit, had nothing to do with DPs. And being involved with the unit, he had asked for certain properties to be turned over. He was going to have a center, you know, a chaplain center and so forth, and he got a building. And when he had to leave, men came and went, he told me about it, and I assumed that he still had the building, you see, and I took it over, and I began to do things with it. What I didn't realize was that once the unit pulled out, everything was revoked, that the permission. And so when I started to take the building and other people came around, I told them this was my building, then they kind of reported this and so forth, and it got to headquarters, and it got to the head of the hospital. And so one day he sent for me. It was an interesting experience. He sat there and he said to me, "Tell me, Chaplain, have you ever visited the patients in this hospital?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, I tell you, we do a lot of business here in VD disease, and I just don't go for a VD." Now, he realized that I was not doing that job, but he also realized that I was doing something else. And then he said to me as follows, "I want you to do me a favor." I said, "Yes." "You have connections." Now, this is the commanding officer talking to me. I said, "I don't know." He says, "When I came through France," he told me the name of the town, he met a Jewish family, a mother and daughter. And he was so impressed by them, for one reason or another, so fond of them, that he very much wanted to do something for them. He doesn't know how. Could you help me? So I said, "Do you have a red line to Paris?" He says, "Yes."
The red line was a direct line?
He says, "I'll take care of it." And I called JDC in Paris. And after that was over, he said to me, "I can't give you anything but the lowest rating as an officer, but the pressure is on. I think you have to leave." So I said, "Fine." We discussed who's putting the pressure on and so forth.
Who was it?
A number of them. Morgan, up north, big Morgan affair. Paul Ed. Paul Ed I didn't care about. That was chaplain's work. It didn't mean anything whether I was a good chaplain or a bad chaplain as far as the Army was. I don't think anybody took him seriously. But the pressure was coming from the G5 section. And
couldn't Nadich help you? Couldn't Nadich?
Nadich had nothing to do with the picture. Absolutely nothing. Nadich came in, his period, made the study. I traveled with him part of the time, and grew up the study, and that was it. And then he left. It had nothing to do with this picture. He once said to me, very interestingly enough, we were talking once, and he said to me, "Abe," he said, "you know, when the request came in originally for that chaplain to be sent to the 116th Evac, I was in the hospital. Had I not been in the hospital, you never would have gotten that assignment."
Why?
Nadich. That was his attitude. I don't know what reasons. Except he says that I don't know anybody who would have done the job. Of course, had it happened differently, I don't know how it would have happened. He wouldn't even have known. No one knew that the 116th was Dachau. The order didn't come in for Dachau. It came for 116th Evac. The guy in charge looked up and down, saw chaplains, Klausner kicking around, doing nothing. Signed to a hospital someplace near Paris. So, there we are.
I have a lot more questions. I don't know how
Well,
you feel at this
I'm
point.
going to stop now because I'm tired.
Okay.
Um,
Another question I wanted to ask you was about the printing of the She'erit HaPleitai, so that was an interesting story.
yes, the first volume was printed in Landsberg. I saw a little shop in a side street. Of course, it wasn't operating because the law didn't allow for printing of any materials. And so I went in and I found the owner and I asked him to print the book, and of course he refused. And then I started to bribe him. It was very cheap, that first issue. That was maybe a couple of cartons of cigarettes, and I remember some coffee, some jars of coffee, a few other little things. Except he had no paper. And I went down to Dachau and I got the paper and I brought it up. And with a promise that perhaps he'll get his printing license back. After all, every printer was waiting until he printed 1,000 copies.
And subsequently?
Each book was a different story, different printer, different bribe, different threat, until the last one, the big volume. This Silvey, Jack Silvey, that was his name, Jack Silvey, S-I-L-V-E-Y, Major Silvey. I sold him on the idea, and he had control of property in Munich, and he arranged for one of the printing houses to print, even supplied the paper.
I know Rabbi Lippman bemoans the fact that he doesn't have one. Rabbi Lippman doesn't have one.
There are very few around. I think I may have one or two.
We talked about your involvement with other chaplains, that it really wasn't... were you concerned about... Rabbi Lippman mentioned to me that he was concerned, and he felt other Jewish chaplains were concerned about not making it look like there was some type of conspiracy, that they didn't want to overly emphasize the fact that they were together, that they were involved in different activities of this sort. That wasn't a concern of yours?
No. I just went about my business.
Okay. What about Patton and the DPs? Story of Patton?
Story of what?
Patton, General
Patton, oh yes. As Patton came up from the south, 3rd Army was in the south and we were in the 7th Army District. Patton was ordered to move north to Munich, and 3rd Army was taking over from 7th Army. I was assigned originally to 7th Army. He had an intense hatred for DPs. They were a nuisance to him. He wanted them out of the way.
It wasn't anti-Semitism.
I don't think it was anti-Semitism. I have no way of believing or saying that it was. All I know is that the orders were to get them out of the way, and from the history of wherever he was, he found that they were a nuisance. He didn't want them in his area. Couldn't tolerate them. And so as he moved north, the movements began. And that's when we got involved in trying to... What was the last point?
We were talking about Patton and...
Yes. So Patton came up and they started to push the DPs, not only Jews, everybody, out of the area. And we were the ones to resist. And, of course, the Jews remained. And under 3rd Army, they were harassed quite a bit. The military police harassed them, and the raids were constant. And then what happened was that the intensity of the complaints about the treatment of people in the camps increased.
What dates are we talking about again? I'm sorry.
Well, again, we'd have to check out the date. Let's say we're talking about sometime in September, August, September.
45.
Yeah. By this time, because in August you already have the August 22nd statement from Eisenhower. By that time, we had gotten to Eisenhower, and we were being heard, and the complaints were many, and issues were being made. I think in the press here in the United States, I haven't seen the press for those days, but I imagine things were being written and said, and the Army was beginning to respond, and one of the responses came in the form of a visit by Eisenhower with Patton to Camp Feldafink. And that was on Rosh Hashanah, or Yom Kippur, I don't remember which it was, 45. At which time Eisenhower took off on Patton. Rather graciously, not in terms of any anger or anything. At one point in their movement through the camp, Patton and Eisenhower was shown a room with sewing machines. Now, it wasn't difficult to get a sewing machine in Germany those days, but it was sure difficult to get a needle, because wherever the machines were, DPs and others, they would take the needles, especially at Dachau, for example. There were rows upon rows of machines, but find a needle. And here you had a camp trying to set up shops and so forth, and here you had the machines and no needle. And at one point, Smith had observed to Eisenhower that there were all the machines but no needles. And Eisenhower turned on Patton then, indicating that a machine without a needle is no machine. Patton kept insisting that he had been aware of the camp and aware of the conditions of war, which wasn't true. He had never responded in terms of the camp or in any positive way. And eventually he was transferred from 3rd Army to 15th Army, and he was killed in an automobile accident.
How you left the 116th? Professor Bauer has that in his
That
book. Was there
story is
anything-
all there,
yeah,
yes.
okay.
It's a full story.
All right. Anything else about the Central Committee that you thought important to tell?
I don't know. It was work that went on weeks, months, long period of time, involved everything, every conceivable kind of a problem. You just imagine you can go on talking endlessly about the activities of our organization.
Mm-hmm.
Problems that came up had to be solved from day to day. Politics within the Central Committee.
Anything as particularly as chaplain that you were able to do, able to accomplish?
Well, everything I accomplished was by virtue of the fact that I was a chaplain. If I weren't a chaplain, I couldn't do it. I was always protected by the fact that I was a chaplain, an officer, and there was a lot of confusion.
Anything about the story about Unser Weg?
No, I gave you the beginnings of Unser Weg,
Okay.
Levy, and but then the paper was on its way.
Fine. Anything about the packages after 46?
No, they dribbled in. We had a warehouse in the building on Ziebertstrasse also where the material, and they were turned over to the committee. See, as the committee became better established, it took over the functions, and especially these housekeeping functions, and I had less and less to do with it. In fact, it got to a point where they asserted themselves. I remember the committee fighting over the storehouses, and inspectors being appointed and seals being put on the locks at night and then opened in the morning, and all the committees checked on them. And this became a part of the inner workings of the committee.
What about Aliyah Bet? Is that a whole story in itself?
Well, that's a story in which my part was only tangential again. In other words, there was another part of this business which I was involved in, and that had to do again with the Irgun.
Okay.
When the Exodus was turned around, an incident occurred. I think it was in connection with the Exodus. An incident occurred in the British zone where a number of men, in retaliation, sought to blow up a railroad. They were unsuccessful. However, they were caught, and they were in prison. The Irgun came to me by way of one of their active workers. She's dead now, a woman, and asked me if I could help.
You remember who she was?
Yes. But for the moment, I will withhold the name. I'll tell you why. asked me if I could devise a plan to get them out of prison. So I said, well, we'll try. And so we went up to the British zone, traveled with her, came to the prison, met the prisoners, and I left. She went on. I don't believe she came back with me. And I stopped at some town, and the reason I stopped there, I think, had to do with a railroad. I think that I had to take a, yes. I had driven up in a car that she had, but I had to come back by train. And I was in this town looking for a connection to get back to Castle. And somebody was standing next to me in a raincoat. And as we were both looking at the schedule, he kind of talked to the schedule, saying, "Don't try, you'll never get them out." And I just turned away and walked away. And I went back to Castle and began to work on a plan to get them out. And we had worked out a plan, and I was able to get jeeps and military, that is MP gear. And we had set up a plan to drive up and, under some pretext which we had worked out, get them out. However, we had to have the consent of the prisoners first. And they didn't want to give us the consent because they hadn't gotten word from the party. And incidentally, they were tried and they were sentenced to death. That's when I was called in, when they were sentenced to death. The story of how they were caught is a fantastic story because it's so stupid. Everything they did was stupid. That in this whole chaotic world of DPs without names, addresses, or anything, the British intelligence were able to pick them up. Well, anyway, at this point, I was asked to come to Paris to meet with the leaders of the Irgun, which I did. I spent some time with them.
Who were they?
Who were they?
Yeah.
Peter Bergson, what's his name, son, Jabotinsky's son. Halpern wore an admiral's uniform because he was going to be
Oh, that, yeah.
and a number of others. And I submitted the plan. And they then decided that they were going to try to use a juridical approach in London. And I waited until they heard from London. I waited in Paris. And they seemed to have been satisfied that there would be a juridical approach, and I then left and went back to Germany and to meet up with, again, another threat of a court-martial. But that was that particular incident.
What happened with
They got out. They did it juridically. I mean, London, they got whatever they, political pressure and so forth.
Were you involved with Ben Gurion?
Yes. I took Ben Gurion on his trip through Germany, drove him from camp to camp. He came at a time when we had set up the meeting at the Rathaus, and I planned it and provided for it, and we have it on tape. We have the whole thing on tape. His speech to the...
He spoke in Yiddish.
No, he spoke in English.
In English?
Yes. The reason why he spoke in English was that we were addressing ourselves to the Army and to the UN and so forth. No, it's all thing is on tape and it's in English. He was there, and the representative. By this time, the Army had appointed a liaison man, officer with the Jewish, with our community. He was there, and the whole committee is there. You could see pictures of the whole committee, and many of the UNRWA workers and the joint workers were all there.
Anything else?
What's his name was there also. I took him on a trip. His brother-in-law, I don't remember his name, Dobkin.
Oh, yes. Sure.
Dobkin, I think, came before.